Hello fans of ridiculously complicated games, welcome back to the Game of Muscle YouTube channel. In this video we have the delightful joy of going through the graphics settings in Project Cars 2, specifically for those of you that want to play with a virtual reality headset, and specifically for those of you that want good settings that look decent but won't cause your computer to burst into flames. Now this would be a good start point for those of you that may be getting sub 90 hertz, 90 frames per second, and you want to make sure that you are hitting that 90 FPS, and then of course you can up the settings afterwards. But on top of doing the graphics settings for good performance in VR, I'll also be covering the other options that turn off some of the annoying stuff in the game that makes it less comfortable than it otherwise could be. So let's begin by going through the performance settings and what I've been using in this current version of the game that I've got here. So resolution 1080, 1920 by 1080. I believe this is the resolution for your actual output screen. This obviously doesn't affect the resolution of your VR headset. That's decided by the VR drivers for the Oculus Rift or the HTC VIVE. So this will be whatever your output screen is. You could probably change that and be alright with it. I don't think it'll make that much of an effect of performance, so I just keep this to the native resolution of the screen that I've got. Windowed, again, it'll just be the output window. I run it full screen. I think maybe you might get a tiny performance boost by not having this windowed, but in Windows 10 that shouldn't make any difference. Texture resolution, high, or as high as you can put it, and this is the case with all VR games. Really, you should just whack the texture resolution all the way up there as high as possible, because it is not demanding for modern graphics cards. I don't know of any situation where having the textures on high really hits performance, but high quality textures look really nice, low quality textures look terrible, so always put the textures on as high as possible. Texture filtering, again, whack this up as high as possible. I've never noticed this with any game, especially in virtual reality, to have a particularly big effect on performance, but again, you notice the filtering, so it's nice to have textures fully filtered to 16x. You might as well use it as it doesn't cost much. VSync, you want on. VR games always have VSync on so you don't get your tearing in the VR headset. Now, AA, or MSAA in this case, is an interesting one with Project Cars 2. What I found is actually running medium. I think the way, because for some reason they've just named it low, medium, high as the options. I think low is 1 times, that's 2 times, I think that's 4 times. It's hard to know for sure because they've not used actual times values, but you know, we'll take a guess that that's what it means. Now, if you run it with MSAA off, you can then use post AA. Now, there's 2 real choices here. Post AA is bloody terrible for VR, because what you tend to get with post AA is blurring, because it uses an effect on top of the game render to sort of smudge out the look of the jagged pixels, and it's horrible. It's horrible in virtual reality. I really don't like it. You lose the clarity. That said, if you were to run no MSAA and no post AA, but you were to run, say, 1.5, 1.6 super sampling, that might actually be fine for you, and that might actually get really good performance for you, and it's probably worth trying, depending on your setup. What I've been using myself, though, is super sampling at 1.0, but MSAA on medium, or what I believe is 2x AA, or it'll be 2x standard anti-aliasing. To me, this looks really good, and then I think if you've got extra performance, you can then put up 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 super sampling to get that extra crispness, and you get slightly better visibility into the distance. But I've been actually really happy with how Project Cars looks with MSAA on medium and super sampling at 1.0. I think that's an area where you probably get a lot of tweaking there, depending on the performance you get. But bearing in mind that this video is specifically for maximum performance, to get in a comfortable quality and having things look good, and I think using 2x MSAA with 1.0 super sampling will be the optimal performance to quality setting, if that makes sense. So you might want to fiddle with that to get more out of it, but this I think will be the highest performing setting. Reflections low and environment map we've got set to low. Reflections can be quite heavy on your graphics card and on your computer in terms of processing, so that's something to normally turn down. In VR, because the resolution isn't amazing, and a lot of the reflections you notice in project cars are actually on the road surface when it's wet, or you notice them on the bonnet of the car, but even on low, and even with the environmental map on low in Project Cars 2, the reflections are more advanced than what you tend to get in other driving games. So it doesn't actually look terrible putting them on low. Again, if you've got a faster computer, you might want to put them on high, but if you're going for optimal performance without it looking terrible and still looking good, I've been really happy running these both on low. Car detail I've set to medium, mostly because I didn't really notice a appreciable difference between medium and high. Apologies. So putting it on medium, I've been perfectly happy with. You might even want to go to low if you're still getting frame rate issues, but I've gone with medium. I've been using that. Cars look fantastic. It look as good, if not better, than the cars in other driving simulators. The car models are absolutely fantastic. What you might notice is if you have really large grids at the start of the race, you get a frame rate impact the higher you put this setting on. If you're driving with a 4-car grid or by yourself, you know, the other cars aren't going to be affecting the frame rate so much, so you can actually put it on lower on higher settings without frame rate issues. I have to say, actually, though, Project Cars 2 actually has really well optimized graphics in terms of lots of cars on the screen and that not affecting performance too much. I think maybe it's because the ISI heritage, the R-Factor G-Motor engine heritage that this game originally had. Obviously, SMS have developed that to the point where it's a new game. It's like the equivalent of Half-Life 1 over Quake, for example, or Doom. Half-Life 1, and even Source Engine Half-Life 2 still have Doom, even Wolfenstein code in them, but you know, they're effectively new games. But there are some things that somehow managed to slither their way through these engines, and I think the car details and the way that Project Cars 2 handles the number of cars on the screen, the engine seems to do that really well. I wouldn't be surprised if that's partly due to the G-Motor heritage. And again, R-Factor 2 and R-Factor 1 and Automobilista always did a really good job of having loads of cars on the screen without it affecting performance that much more than just having a few cars on the screen. Regardless, track detail we set to medium. This will be mostly the objects around the track and how densely the tracks are like filled with objects and what have you. So in VR, again, you know, you're normally quite focused on the driving and racing simulators anyway. But again, in VR, you're not particularly looking at the side details as clearly as you might do with in 2D. I've been perfectly happy with medium. I'm playing it on medium. I haven't looked at it and gone, oh, that looks awful. The tracks look totally bland. On medium, you still got animated people standing at the side of the track. You still got not all of them, but obviously lots of trackside buildings and everything. Perfectly happy with medium. You might want to experiment with this. A lot of this is going to be down to your personal preference, but medium to me seems to be get a good trackside density, good number of spectators and objects and everything, and the performance seems to be pretty good with that setting as well. Pit crew detail now. I've not experimented with this too much, so it's up to you. But if you put all on, basically what it is you get you've got pit crews that come out when you do your pit stops. If you only have player only your pit crew will show. If you have all on, then all the pit boxes will be populated with pit crews, which does increase the demand on the computer, especially given that the pit boxes and the actual start-finish line is probably the most densely packed part of a racetrack already. Adding that pit crews, animations, and all the other cars that are maybe doing pit stops, then you're asking for it to likely have more frame drops. Again, I've not had many problems with this, but I've not fully tested it with a full field race with everyone coming into the pit box. So I play it on the safe side and just keep it onto player only. You know, in terms of gameplay, that functions perfectly fine and it doesn't ruin immersion too much. Shadow detail. Now, for this setting, I would say it does, having it on low, well, if you put it on off, the cars look like they're floating because they don't have the proper shadows underneath the vehicles, or like dynamic shadow of the vehicles. You do have a sort of contact shadow that I think is a post-processing effect if you have shadow detail set to off. But it looks, in my opinion, it really does ruin the immersion of the game. It makes the cars look very disconnected from the road surface. Low, I would say, is the bare minimum, and if you were going to fiddle with other settings, say you've got a really slow computer, I would still try and put shadow detail on low and then fiddle with other settings. But low to me works fine. You get most of the shadows there. The only downside with low, I think, is you notice some of the cockpit shadows get that kind of shimmery effect on them at certain times of day or certain angles where the shadows are being stretched more. You don't get the nice smooth sharp edges, or the sort of the sharp edge but then with the smooth fall off on it on low. You might want to go to medium. High, I can only assume high is like a solar eclipse and your mind is blown. I'm perfectly happy with low. Medium, I think, is ideal. I rather get the performance from that and go low, because shadows as well are something that actually do take up a lot of processing, so this will have quite a large effect on the end result and the end frame rate. Enhanced mirror, I've not needed to put it on, to be honest. It looks perfectly fine. I guess if you really want super resolution mirrors, you could turn that on. For me, that's not really been a problem. I'm perfectly fine with that on no. I don't know why it's not off, yes or no. I've had that on no, and it looks fantastic still. So again, compared to other games with mirrors, even with that on no, it looks as sharp as any other driving simulator I've played in VR. So there you go. Motion blur, I mean, off, even in 2D. Why would you play with motion blur? You really have to be suffering from a brick to the forehead to like motion blur whilst you're playing a game, unless it's for the replays and trackside cameras and that kind of stuff. But for actual gameplay where you're interacting with stuff, God knows why people like motion blur. They should be executed immediately. Of course, if you like it, turn it on, but you know, you'd have to be stupid. Render frames ahead, 1 is the default. That's fine. It's fine. I mean, you can fiddle with it. I've left it on 1 all this time, and I'm perfectly happy with that. No problems with it at all. I'd say as well, Project Cars 2 doesn't have the head latency tracking and delay issues that used to be a problem with Project Cars 1. And you notice in some games when you have render frames ahead, sometimes that can cause delay with mouse when you're doing FPS with render frames ahead, when the mouse movement can feel a little bit delayed. And with VR games, sometimes it can feel delayed. But with render frames ahead 1 in this, it's fine. I've no problems with it at all. No need to change that. Detailed grass. Of course, grass is really important. I have a bizarre fetish for 3D rendered grass. I find it makes the world, the virtual world, look more realistic. It basically breaks up that feeling of it being a flat texture on the floor and a floor that's actually got, you know, objects on it. It actually has grass and is soil. Makes it a lot more organic looking. And to me, you also get a better sense of speed when you've got grass going past you on the circuits that do have grass at the side of the circuit, and you sort of glance to your left, you see it whizzing past. I think you get a lot better sense of speed. It's one of the reasons why I like grass mod tracks in a set of course that have grass on them. Check out our top 5 mod tracks if you want to be blown away by that. And games like Richard Burns Rally, even though it's 300 years old, it's got lots of hedges and grass. So despite the lighting in Richard Burns Rally not really holding up, and the shaders, the actual density of the grass and objects make it still feel really quite realistic and quite organic and believable. So with that said, I like to put it on medium. You could run it on low, you could turn it off, but I go for medium. I've got pretty good performance with this. Grass can normally be quite a heavy toll on the computer in some games and not in others. I think in Project Cars 2 it's actually optimised quite well, so it's not a massive pull on your performance. So I've been happy with mediums. It's worked well. This could be a setting. You might want to set this to low if you are getting performance issues, and off if you really need to upgrade your computer and you're sort of getting depressed. Particle level. Now, this seems to have quite a big impact on frame rate. Not when it's dry and sunny, mind you. Project Cars 2 does a really good job with the smoke and how optimised and how that doesn't affect performance negatively, in contrast to many games, many driving simulators where smoke actually does have a big impact on performance. But the particle level, where it does impact performance particularly, is in the wet and if it's rainy. So you definitely want to turn this down, if you notice that you're getting performance drops when when it starts raining in the game, or especially when there's spray coming off the tyres, definitely turn it down. You might want to put it to off if your computer's dying. I've had it on medium. I'd probably recommend low, to be honest, if you're doing a lot of wet weather driving in project cars, especially if you're dropping between the frame rate. I've been doing a lot of dry driving at the moment, so I've just, if you know you're not going to be doing wet racing, you might as well just turn that up, and you'll get the nice smoke effects, and you won't have to worry about the rain slowing the game down. But it's not a surprise that the rain is actually quite demanding, because there is a lot of stuff going on when it's wet. You've got the extra floor reflections, you've got the particle effects, not only from the sort of spray from the wheels, but there's raindrops in the sky. There's a lot more going on. So if you're specifically noticing slowdown when it starts raining in the game, definitely look at turning the particle levels to low or off if your computer potato is really struggling. And particle density, again, that's how many of the particles, I believe, are spawned on top of the actual particle level. So it's the same thing as I said for the previous one. Effectively, I've had that on medium, but if you're driving in the dry, you might be able to put it on high or medium, have no problems. If you're driving in the wet and you're getting slowed down, definitely look at putting it to low. You can go all the way up to ultra if you've got a 1080 Ti and you're feeling good about your computer and you've overclocked everything. Ultra everything. So that's most of that's the performance graphics settings. Let's go to the visual effects. Now these are some things you need to change, or I feel you need to change for VR to actually have the game look decent without wanting to wrench your eyeballs off your face. Post-processing filters, I've turned them off. It looks really nice without them, so I just leave that off. I don't know if that has that much of an effect on performance like it does with Assetto Corsa, for example, but I've just turned it off. Exterior sun flare, I put that on full. That's when you're outside the car, so it looks all right, and normally I'm inside the car, so I don't notice that anyway. Interior sun flare, however, you definitely want to turn this off, in my opinion, because you don't want the sun flare coming through the VR headset, because effectively when you're playing in VR, you want it to look like as if you were there in reality. Now obviously if you're wearing a helmet in reality, you kind of get, when the sun shines through the plastic visor on your helmet, you get some like flares and stuff, but it doesn't really mirror that experience and in Project Cars 2 to reality, and it just looks better with it off, in my opinion. It just looks cleaner, so I prefer that. Bloom, again, I've just turned that off. Again, it's kind of a preference thing, but I think you get a more pure, more realistic looking game with bloom off. Heat haze, this is a weird one. I think in some ways, some people might want to turn this on, but what I find is it can cause some flickering and aliasing in VR, so I've just turned it off. I've not fully experimented with it. I don't know if it particularly affects performance or not. I've just had it off because, again, I really like just a crisp, clear image when driving in VR. But I can see how this could be a real personal preference. A lot of these are just personal preference as well. But for me, it's all about just getting as clear and sharp, natural-looking image as possible, and that's what I'm going for with this. Global specular irradiance kind of like fakes like diffuse shadows around stuff and diffuse colour around things, from what I understand. So say you've got like a blue car on like a brown bit of tarmac or grey bit of tarmac, that grey bit of tarmac should pick up some of that blue colour from the car, because in reality it'd be all the light rays would be reflecting off everything. Everything is lit by everything. Everything is effectively a light bulb in reality, but you can't really process that in real time. You can't even you can process it in a 3D modeling package, but even then that takes ages, and even then it's a cut down version of what happens in reality. This sort of emulates that. I leave it on, but you could turn it on and off. I think one thing this might do that I noticed more recently is if you look at your mirrors whilst you're driving this on, you can sometimes see almost like a shadow around the mirror, as if the mirror was making a shadow on the road, like a diffuse shadow. So you might want to turn this off, try it on and off. I've left it on. I'm really happy with the visual results with it on, but you might want to experiment with that. Exposure compensation, got that to 1.0. You can adjust this if you want the sky to look more white or washed out, or if you want the image to be slightly duller. 1 to me seems to get the maximum out of the Oculus Rift headset, for the lights and the darks. If I was to take a photograph of the scene and I was trying to get as much colour and detail as possible, I would leave it at 1. So that's what I've gone for. Raindrops, I don't know why that's on. Oh yeah, but yeah, this is a bit contentious for me. With the raindrops on, they're kind of weird in VR because it's as if there's raindrops on your face, and it doesn't feel like they're on like your helmet visor. They feel like they're kind of on your face. Now, why they're kind of good to keep on is because it lets you know that it's actually raining in the game before it's a full-on torrential downpour, or before there's other aspects of the rain that are noticeable. So from a gameplay perspective, you might want to have them on, but from a VR perspective, it does feel like you've got a sheet of perspex centimetres from your face and someone's spraying a shower head at you. So, you know, it's up to you. I think now, actually, having experimented with it more, I think I'd probably prefer it with it off and just try and be aware of the weather by looking at the clouds and paying attention to droplets that appear on the car bodywork, actually, because you can see drops, water appear on the car as soon as it starts raining, as well as your visor. So probably better to have it off. Vignette, which is the dark edges around the edge of a screen. If you take a picture and you've messed up the edges, you've got an old camera. Vignette is that sort of just dark around the edges and lighter in the middle. It's like a you imagine like a 1930s photograph. You don't want that on in VR. It just you know, the field of view isn't massive on a VR headset. Vignette will tend to make the field of view look even narrower. Make it look as if you've got a bit of tunnel vision. You don't want that in VR, so turn that off. I can't even pronounce this word. I always say crepuscular rays. I don't know. I can't read. But what these are they're the sort of God rays. They should just call it God rays. Everyone knows what they are. They're like they are the God rays when you've got like dust in the environment, or smoke in the environment, fog, and then you have say a shadow, and you've got a light, the sun behind it, and you can see the shadow almost as if it was like a beam. Makes the headlights, makes the lights look like beams and what have you. I just turn it off because you get some weird. They look a bit weird when you move your head around at times, and sometimes they interact with the car cockpit. And to be honest, if you're playing with an Oculus Rift, and even with the Vive as well, those headsets give you some like God rays inside the headset just because of the way the lenses work on the VR headsets. So you know, you've already got it physically there happening, and generally you're trying to avoid it. So to have the game produce even more, it's just it's as if someone's shining a torch in your face through some blurred out plastic. Is, you know, it's not ideal. I can see how some people might like it. Might be worth trying out, but personally I'd turn it off. Screen dirt I'd turn off. Again, it's like a bit of perspex plastic right in your face, and someone's put manure all over it, then washed it off badly. It just looks horrible to me. I could see, if you're playing in 2D, I could see how it might look quite nice. It can make it feel more gritty and less serene and clean. But in VR, because the dirt is kind of affixed to your face when you look around, it just doesn't work in my opinion in VR. So I'd turn that off. Cockpit mirrors, we've got them turned on, and nicely the mirrors in Project Cars 2 actually move with your head. When you move, they move, so you could like an iRacing and Live for Speed. So the mirrors are actually really useful, and in some ways you don't need a proper rear view mirror because you can use the side mirrors properly. Though some cars also have those little TV screens in them. Now the camera stuff, what I'd recommend doing, you've got the field of view settings here for the cameras. These should be ignored for VR, apart from the third person view. But in general, I think these are ignored for VR when I've messed around with it. But a good thing to do is go to the movement tab here and set everything to 0, turn off the shake, turn off all the world movement and everything. And this way, it makes the headset as still as possible with the car. This is my preference, though. Now, I know there's sort of argument between different VR users in terms of what causes motion sickness. Some people like having a bit of camera movement. Some people like it if the camera, rather than being completely locked to the car, follows the world. And it will probably depend on what you've got used to. Because what it seems to be the case with motion sickness in VR, and especially with driving simulators and with the car movements, if you've got world movement or no world movement, it seems to me to be the case that if you've got used to one of them and that hasn't made you motion sick, then that's what you should keep using because that works for you. Intuitively speaking, personally, I always found if it's locked to the car, in my mind, the movement is coming from the car, and because with realistic simulators, that's happening in a way that's intuitive. It makes sense in my mind. I'm getting the rumbles. Okay, don't know why I said that. I'm getting the motion through the force feedback steering wheel to correlate with what's going on with the car and the movements. So it all makes sense to me and doesn't make me motion sick. That said, as I say, if you've got used to having the camera move around in the cockpit, tilting and what have you in relation to the world, almost smoothing out some of those motions, and that doesn't make you motion sick, then that's fine for you. Then you'll want to fiddle with these settings. But this is what I've been using. So you could give that a go if you haven't tried anything else. I'm happy with this, but don't be surprised if someone else has some other settings that are actually more comfortable for you in regard to the head movement. So again, it's a sort of personal preference thing. But on that note, I think that's pretty much. Oh yes, well, might as well cover this thing as we're going through all the VR settings. That's pretty much everything to set up the game for VR in terms of getting the maximum performance to quality, in my opinion. And then obviously I said some of the settings are a personal preference. You might want to tweak them depending on the type of driving you're doing and depending on your system. You've got the super sampling setting. You can do it in this setting or the other page. It doesn't make much difference. Gaze control. Oh yeah, this is interesting. You've got a cursor in the game that tracks your head movement when you're not actually in the car and you want to just control the mouse on the screen, and then you can just use an enter button. What I have noticed is if you use a mouse to click the enter button, say you're using a touchpad mouse, it's really annoying because then you end up with the mouse coming on the screen and then it goes off the gaze thing and then it goes back to the mouse and backwards and forwards. But if, for example, you have a Thrustmaster steering wheel or Logitech steering wheel or a steering wheel that has like a D-pad on it, and you set those up to navigate the menus, then the gaze controls is actually really quite good for actually selecting options, especially once you've got all the other stuff set up where you might do that with your keyboard and mouse. So you might want to put that on and let you use the cursor. You can have it so it's off completely. You can have it so it comes on sporadically depending on if you're using your headset or not, or you can have it on a manual option. I just turn it off and I just use a mouse when I'm sat in my sim rig. Even with the VR headset, I've got a little mini keyboard with a touchpad on it. I find that really useful. My steering wheel as well is it's a custom direct drive wheel, so it doesn't have the D-pad on it, so it's not quite as easy to navigate menus with the steering wheel. Recenter view on boot. Obviously, when you start the game, it recenters the view. Recenter at race start. Again, that's just up to you. What I definitely would do is you go to the controls, the bindings. Actually, one of the first things you should do. Oh dear. You should go to edit assignments, and at the camera and view at the very bottom, there's center VR headset, and you just bind that to a button on your steering wheel, so you don't need to worry about those other settings in terms of auto recentering. And what I found actually is when you first start the game, you get the little intro video. If you recenter that screen so it's right in the middle and you're done, the game doesn't have any problems in terms of like drift or anything, and you're all good. But what I tend to do with all driving games, I always center the VR headset, have that button on my steering wheel there, because there's some cars that might be slightly wrong, or you might be mid-race and you want to adjust quickly, and you can just move yourself and recenter the view. So it's a really handy thing to have. But there you go. I think that pretty much covers all the graphics settings, all the options. Oh, actually, last one, clipping plane. I won't worry about this. I've left this on a default. That'll just be for when you start sticking your head through stuff, at what point it actually disappears off. 0.04 is fine. So there you go. That's the graphics settings for Project Cars 2. Set up for virtual reality. In terms of, in my opinion, there's some subjectivity, as I say, of getting the best performance whilst good visual clarity. A good start point, I'd argue, to then start putting settings up higher should you actually have a faster system and should you not have slowed down. But if you are testing for your performance, definitely do some races with, say, at least 25 cars. Definitely do some races with 25 cars in the wet and in the snow and in the bathtub, in all the different situations that you get in Project Cars 2 to see what performance you get. All in all, though, I have to say, Performance-wise, the end result of Project Cars 2, it seems to be pretty similar to Project Cars 1, if not a tiny bit more optimized, more consistent, and doesn't have the it works better in VR, and it doesn't have the head smoothing issues I used to find with Project Cars 1. So really nice job by Slightly Mad Studios, really nice VR support, and I hope this video was useful to you guys. Of course, if you would find it useful, you've got to click the subscribe button. Feel free to drop any questions in the comment section, and I'll answer them. If you've got any problems, I'll answer them. And anyone else that's had any good results with their settings, pop them in the comment section so people can get help from it. It's really helpful to see what other people have done. You know, because different, as I say, there's different preferences to what people like and what actually might be the ultimate feat for a given person. It's going to be different. But this should be a good baseline. So subscribe, like. It's the morning. That's why I sound terrible. It's really early in the morning. So I'm gonna have a breakfast and a cup of tea. My first tea of the day. That's why this video was probably terrible. Till the next one, guys. Goodbye.